Am I getting glare on the glasses? Are we okay?
No, can we move the glass case a little bit?
I gotta look slumped if I hunch or slumped. Hunched
I'll let you know if you need to straighten up. Right there, we don't want to be too stiff either. Catch us together.
Right. Hello, my name is Drew VanDyche.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be here and talk to you today. Children, we are gonna talk about celibacy. Now, celibacy use.
Okay.
It's like the Geico lizard. Talking about celibacy. All right.
Yeah, that was hilarious there. Okay. What is your name and what is your title? What do you do?
Okay. My name is Drew VanDyche. Before we begin, what I'd like to do is make a kind of apology, I guess a confession. Back in 1988, I was in a ex-gay ministry program called Love in Action, run by Exodus International, which I suppose within the last decade has gotten a lot of bad press, and rightly so. But in 1988, when I was much younger, I was at a Exodus conference, and I ended up on camera and basically was left with a slug line that said homosexuality is dysfunctional in its roots. And what I want to do today for you guys is to apologize for anyone who saw that video, which was called One Nation Under God, and let you know that today I am happy and healthy and self-identify currently as 75% gay, 25% bi-curious, and I am doing my work in regards to spirituality and sexual intimacy through the Human Awareness Institute Love, Sex, and Intimacy workshops up at Harbin Hot Springs, and they are workshops that have changed my life, and now I am happy and if not totally whole, on the way to to wholeness. So for those of you who saw One Nation Under God, please forgive me if I hurt you, outraged you, or in any way caused you to stumble. Thanks.
And what brought you to the spiritual path?
Okay. Wow. The context that I was raised in Turlock, California, which is near Modesto in the Central Valley, Stanislaus County. And I was raised in Christian school K through 12, and in the Evangelical Free Church of America, which I guess I would say sex was never mentioned. I never had a formal class in sexuality. I didn't have basic sex 101 or anything. It was all, furtively behind the bushes in the PE field or something, so I did not get a chance to learn by having a basic sexuality course in school, and so ultimately I've had to learn a lot about it on my own. And when I was a kid, celibacy was highly important to me, and yet the church that I grew up in, basically whenever they talked about sex, it was don't have sex before marriage, and if they ever talked about homosexuality as an alternative lifestyle, it was spoken with derision. So let me tell you a little story that may kind of clue you into how I felt about myself. When I was about 10 years old, my mother caught me in bed with another boy fooling around, and basically sent him home, threw me into her bedroom on my knees on the floor, and read me the riot act out of the Bible on homosexuality. And the label or identity that I received from that, and I would say it was kind of a curse, I received into my spirit, was that I was an abomination to God. And so I had much self-loathing. And 3 years later, then my mother died of breast cancer. The night before my mother died, my dog died. So in one weekend, I lost my best friend and my mother. And then my twin sister took over as woman of the house. So I have had to struggle with issues of fear of abandonment when it comes to women, as well as the resentment for being subjected to having to obey my twin sister, who in a sense was supposedly my equal peer. But when Mom died, my father hibernated in a corner with a lazy boy and the Bible, trying to hold on to his own sanity, and we were left to fend for ourselves. And so I always felt like it was my responsibility to maintain the relationship and take responsibility for the relationship. So I have some ambivalence when it comes to women, because with my sister, it always felt like I was coming to her to repair that relationship like a puppy dog with my tail between my legs. And that is not a good feeling, and that is not a mature way to heal and repair relationships. So I think that fostered this split within me. I always said I've had about 4 different splits in my life. I felt like I was split between the masculine and the feminine. As a twin, my twin sister, she's born 2 years older than me, and she will never let me live it down. I almost feel like she got the male brain and I got the female one, because I often feel like I think very much like a female, and she's very right-brained, and she's very left-brained and very linear and logical. And it's quite interesting. She finds me exhausting. We had an interesting conversation once where she sat me down and she said, Andy, and that's who she called me, Andy, even though I go by Drew now, I don't want to remember who I used to be. And you always want to have these intense conversations. And I thought, when I got home from that meeting, I called my father and I said, Dad, this is just so unfair. It's like, you guys were part of the problem, Why don't you want to be part of the solution? So it's been very interesting trying to navigate and find my own way in the world without any one person, so to speak, to guide me. But I have had the fortunate opportunity to stumble into many wonderful parachurch organizations that have contributed to healing my damaged soul, my inner child, and my emotions. And I guess I could pinpoint about 2005, November 2005, I did a workshop called the New Warriors Training Adventure, and that's sponsored by the Mankind Project. And it is like an emotional boot camp for men, and it was a wake-up call for me into who I was and what the possibilities were in my life, and that it started me on the road to understanding that I am whole, perfect, and complete, lacking in nothing, that God loves me just the way I am, and I decided that about a couple years ago, I said, damn it, I am done being miserable, being a miserable person in my life, and I decided I am going to go back to seminary and pick up the mantle where I dropped it, and find out who I am, deal with all of those unresolved issues from being raised in a Christian culture and in Christian school. And do we need to... being raised in a Christian culture and Christian school, and I've had to unlearn a lot just to bring myself kind of up to zero. And another of the organizations that helped me out was the East Bay Church of Religious Science. And under their teaching, they call it Science of Mind, by a guy named Ernest Holmes, I was able to start recognizing that, as Reverend Muwada there says, your consciousness makes a difference, that we create our reality between our ears. And so what is our consciousness, and what we think actually scripts and sculpts and creates our own reality that we live in. And I think what I love about returning to the scene of the crime, so to speak, going back into a Christian culture at seminary, is that I get a chance to heal a lot of those old wounds and be triggered and make a mess and have to, screw up and ask for forgiveness and move forward. But it's life, and it's real, and it's raw, and it's transparent and love. And in the Mankind Project, in the workshop, they asked us to create our own mission statement. And so my mission statement is that I create a world of love by being transparent within myself, by sharing my emotions with others, and by speaking forth my truth. And then we also have a word that we say, we call it aho. It's kind of an amen. The female version, I guess, or feminine version is ashe. But it's aho, which stands for us authenticity, honesty, and openness. And that's my desire in the way that I live my life, to have no secrets. Because as at least a lot of 12-step people know, we're only as sick as our secrets. So.
I'm surprised you didn't run away from religion entirely with that kind of an upbringing, and it being such an influence in that kind of upbringing.
Well, I did run away for a while. After I graduated high school, 84, in 88 I was in the Love in Action Exodus ministry, ex-gay ministry program. I guess Love in Action at that time was a much kinder experience than what has been seen happening within the last 10 years. And so I actually feel like there were things that I did get out of it. For one, I realized I could not perform my way through the world. It's too exhausting to try to put on a mask. My dad used to joke and laugh at me because he said, Andrew, your room is so messy, but whenever you walk out the door, you're sparkling clean. And I just can't help but think that there's some kind of psychology behind that. And I don't think I was ready to go there. But for me, many times in my younger life, it was like putting on a mask and a costume and looking in a mirror before I went out the door and saying, it's showtime! And, being whatever other people said I was supposed to be. And it's only been within the last 5 years that I've started to recognize that my best work in this world is to know myself and know the truth of who I am in every aspect of my personality, of my psychology, of my spirituality, of my religion, of my sexuality, and to explore all of those areas with a conscious intention of healing whatever breaches or there may be. And I think that with a divine feminine, that's what High has brought to me. Going to the High workshops is I get to explore. Let's see, what was it? Star Trek used to say, where no man has gone before, where no Drew has gone before. And so women to me are fascinating creatures, and I don't want to be afraid of them. I want to be able to give and receive love with them just as much as I give and receive love to my male friends and or partners. So I have chosen a path of using sexual discovery as a place of enlightenment. And this is just my belief system, but I believe that on a fundamental level, if you know anything about quantum physics and science, we're all made up of the same stuff. So if there is a God, that God is made up of the same stuffs too. So we kind of carry the God spark. So if that's the truth, every person on the face of this planet is a manifestation of God. And how much better, how much more wonderful could it be than to be able to love the many manifestations of God upon this planet? And I feel very fortunate to be who I am today, to be where I am today, and to know there's so much more possibilities and potential for growth and a transformation of my being, my identity, and my existence. And part of that is through the joy of a sexual encounter. High uses the term sex is sacred energy exchange, and I'm in a path right now where really good sex to me is almost a sacrament. You know, I mean, it borderlines on that place of being a sacrament, of surrender. Surrender to the other. Surrender to the namaste. Namaste meaning, you know, God, the God within us. To surrender to the namaste in you and say, what do we want to co-create today in our reality, and see what happens. So,
Cool.
So yeah.
Thanks. Okay, and what is your idea of celibacy in spirituality and religion?
Okay. Well, I'm going to take it here.
Go ahead.
When I first started thinking about that, I was like, okay, well, maybe I should prepare a little bit for this interview. So I went online to Wikipedia, and I of course pulled up celibacy, and celibacy originally, in one of its original definitions, was really just a refraining from marriage. But later on, celibacy and sexual abstinence came to mean the same thing, or to be used interchangeably. I do know that I had a lot of shame around my sexuality. Being raised in a Christian school and feeling like who I was inside was not acceptable, I wore many masks, but I remember I felt so... I guess there's a verse in the Bible that says, he who thinketh it in his heart, so is he. So in other words, the thought is the deed, or is as consequential as the deed. The motivation behind it. And so I often felt very guilty when I would masturbate. And there were times that I felt like, because I felt like even masturbation was some kind of a turning away from God. Rather than masturbation being a form of self-love, it became this escape from self. So, I mean, I believe that the answer is not either or. The answer is not that celibacy is a delusional approach towards righteousness or holiness. But there is an element of learning that can be done by a person actually choosing to abstain for periods of time to find out more about who they are as a person and as a psychological embodied human being. So the question is not, is it either or? The answer is really both and. I do know that well, Okay, I'll take a little confessional here. I used to like masturbate 3 times a day, I swear. You know, like once in the morning when I woke up, at school, of all places. Okay, yes, I know, it's horrible. And I would feel totally guilty, and like shame was on my face every time I walked back into class after doing that, and then probably at night. But then I felt like God wasn't really happy with my masturbation, you know? And so there were times where I would abstain because I thought God would not honor me and honor my performances. And it really became this really weird, symbiotic, parasitic relationship between performance and abstaining from sex. So if I had a performance to do, like if I was a drum major in high school, so if I had a parade to do, you know, I would like start abstaining from masturbation or sex like a week or 2 before, you know, because I needed to store up some righteousness or whatever, so that God would honor me and honor my performance, and then I could perform to the best of my ability, because I then knew, of course, God was on my side. So, but I do know that in the year that I spent at Love in Action in San Rafael back in 1988, being celibate that whole year, I think I started to learn the areas where actually I was using masturbation as a medication device or a numbing out, and as an escape from self. So I do believe that there is the potential to refrain from sexual encounters, specifically for the purpose of using that energy that might normally be spent and or released in a sexual encounter for something else. And whether it's a creative endeavors that you do, I no longer tie it to God's acceptability or love of me. But I do think that there are times that building the sensual energy is good, but also refraining from actually pushing yourself all the way over to climax is also good. There's a men's group, I don't know if you know about it. It was called the Body Electric. I believe it was started by Joseph Kramer back in the 70s. And you know, their intention is through like touch and massage to raise the sensual energy, but their purpose is not for climax or orgasm. You know, their purpose is to raise it and move the sensual energy throughout the body, and to help people feel more comfortable as embodied beings. We are spiritual beings having human experiences, and God, goddess, eternal spirit, whatever you call that force out there that is watching over us, is pleased when we learn how to love. I don't think she cares whether we masturbate, whether we have a sexual encounter. I think that the great divine out there is more interested in how we show love to each other, and that love may be manifest in a sexual way. But I think there's a verse in the Bible that I love that says, "Man looketh on the outside, but God looketh on the heart." So it's what's your intention? What's your motivation? What's your conscious reality in going into this encounter, this sexual meeting of 2 souls who manifest the divine in the most unique ways, and what is co-created in those moments of ecstasy, bliss, and climax. And I have grown so much by facing those fears, especially with women, And I don't know where I'll end up on the Kinsey scale. I always joke that I'm using the Kinsey scale like a stripper pole, going up and down it. But because I don't know, where I'm going to end up. My twin sister actually went from straight to gay. She's in a gay relationship, and I seem to be doing. For the first 18 years, I lived a double life and, pretended to be straight in a Christian environment and was going out and doing things on the weekends or whatever, whenever I could, find that outlet for all of that, the hormonal activity that was happening in my body as my body started to grow and mature and move into a space where sexuality really was a potential and a possibility. But it was very weird. It was very weird. I grew up in the Evangelical Free Church of America, and it was horribly shame-producing to be sitting in church and in absolute horror at myself because gay men are running through my mind, or whatever, while the sermon is going on, so it's, and I beat myself up over that for many different years, and now I believe that, what, God doesn't care who you love, God just cares that you love, so.
Good stuff. And what is your idea of some of the great spiritual teachers of all-time history? Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, Moses, and those historical figures that have created this huge populace and following. Is it your understanding that they were celibate in her lifetime?
Oh, wow. Part of it I think has to do with who you think Jesus is. I'm still in the process of developing my theology, so I may be getting my terms wrong, but I think I'm kind of a Christian universalist, which, if I believe correctly, Jesus was my first God, but also kind of my first boyfriend. It's very interesting. My friend Chris Hockley jokes and talks about Christian contemporary music, and he calls it "Jesus is my boyfriend" music, which I love because here we are. There's probably millions of straight men every week who meet in church and then are singing songs of love to this God that actually had a penis, And sometimes I think somebody seriously should write a book called, how the evangelical church and the Christian right made me gay, So, but besides that, if Jesus was, as a Christian universalist, I do think that Jesus was God, but I don't know if Jesus was the only God. What I like about the Jesus story, for me, is it showed the kind of God who was willing to limit herself into a human form and, in a sense, get in our box with us and then blow the shit out of them. So Jesus is the one that came and lived our lives, so to speak. And my own personal belief is that Jesus's payment, if it was necessary on the cross, paid for everything, was perfectly redemptive, and everyone in this world is going to heaven. That is my personal belief, that Jesus' suffering, sacrifice, whatever you want to call it, was absolutely and totally redemptive. And whenever we forget who we are and what our divine destiny is, that's when we start getting off the path, and we start getting disconnected from our source. And then, of course, that egoic mind that just loves to chatter and whirl on I don't believe that that was ever God's intention. Back in the maybe 5-6 years ago, I guess, I was reading a book by a woman named Jill Bolte Taylor, and if you know about Jill Bolte Taylor, she was a neuroanatomist, maybe still is, I don't know what she calls herself, but she has some TED Talks out there on YouTube. But she has a book called My Stroke of Insight, and in that book, she had a brain hemorrhage, and most of her left hemisphere was flooded with blood, which kills the brain cells. So she lost a lot of her linear capacity for logic and speech and categorization and things like that. And we are such amazing machines and in our human beingness, because the brain is so plastic that it has the ability to use other brain cells in place of ones that may die. And she had spent quite a lot of time relearning things, and she talks about how frustrating it was on one level, and yet on another level, she said that when the left hemisphere was silent, she felt that she was one with the universe. And so she postulated, and I took this into my spirit as my belief system, she postulated that if there is a God, that God resides within the right brain consciousness, within the right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is always going to give you an either or. It's going to make you choose. It's going to, divide things up. But the right hemisphere is always going to draw the connections. And where are our similarities? Where are we more alike than we are different? And so I thought, wow, great hypothesis, and I'm really tracking with her, and I believe this. And then I hit my introduction to the Old Testament, and I hit the story in the Garden of Eden about the two trees in the garden. And if you don't know what the two trees in the garden, supposedly God put Adam in the garden, and of course, when he found out none of the animals was a suitable, acceptable mate and or companion for God, and for Adam, that God took a rib out of Adam and made woman, which means for man, because woman was supposedly man, made for man. Whether you believe in literal creation or not, I think this story is fascinating. And God placed within the garden two trees, one tree called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and one tree called the tree of life. And when I read that again after reading Jill's book, I realized, oh my God, maybe the ancient Hebrews and Israelites understood some of the brain function and the psychology, or God gave them some kind of inspiration, because I said the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is your left brain consciousness, it's your left hemisphere, and the tree of life is your right hemisphere, because God actually gave them a prohibition. God gave them a prohibition against eating. He said, of every tree in the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil do not eat, for in that day you shall surely die. Okay. And so then Christian doctrine is going to tell you Satan comes along and tempts Eve to eat the fruit, and then she gives it to Adam. And of course, then we become in a fallen condition, and I personally don't believe in original sin. But what I do think is that if there's any meaning and purpose to that story, is that God wanted us to be more right hemispheric in our consciousness. That God did not want us to look at the world through a lens of good and bad, black and white, either or. That God's actual intention was for us to gain our knowledge through relationship. And that's what I believe that the tree of life stood for and the right hemisphere stands for, because it is within the right hemisphere that we get those kind of bondings and relationships that foster and nurture growth and maturity in our lives, and that we were we were created dialogical human beings, and we were meant to learn our knowledge through that dialogue with each other. Sidney M. Girard, writer back in, 60s, 70s, wrote a really great book called The Transparent Self. And what he said that we become as we disclose ourselves to each other. We become as we disclose ourselves to each other. That a huge part of identity formation happens within a conversation, within a communication. Not only because when I talk, I hear myself think, and it reiterates, okay, when I say it out, there's something about the spoken word that disrupts the status quo. There's something about the vibration of speaking something out into the ethos that allows you to hear it yourself and to then make a decision of, is that the actual statement of what I really believe within my feeling, my felt self, or is this just some kind of programming that I've received from my parents and the way that I grew up, from teachers, churches, schools, whatever. And I believe that God wants us to be absolutely free and to be at choice at every moment of our existence. And what I believe that story tells me is that at any moment in my life, I have the opportunity to step from the left hemisphere and consciously step into the right and choose to love. Because I believe that God is love, and that's all there is. Anything that's not love, yes, okay, why do bad things happen to good people? But there's also verses in the Bible that say all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to His, and I add her for inclusion, of course, purposes. And so that anything that I do, nothing that I do, can separate me from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And that's why I feel like I am on this path that creates more options, more possibilities, more ways of looking at the world and living and being in the world. There's another verse in the Bible I love so much that says, in Him, and of course, yes, I know the masculine patriarchal Him, again, but in Him we live and move and have our being. So there's a part of me that feels like if it weren't for God, we would not exist. That's just my take on that thing. So your original question was, were they celibate? I don't know. Maybe Jesus was celibate, maybe because he was storing up the energy to be used for something else, but I think he had a relationship with God that was more fully surrendered than the one that at least I enjoy today. And I do think that, I would like to be the kind of person who has a story that's worth retelling. And that's why I wanted to tell my story. And how are we doing? Where are we headed? What do you want to?
Doing good. And then, what is? Does heaven include sex?
Does heaven include sex? Well, okay. In the Bible. See, and I find this interesting that I'm talking from the Bible because my father is a literal fundamentalist. So he believes that the Bible is the inerrant word of God. God said it, I believe it, that settles it, boom. So anytime when I was a kid and I was like frustrated or confused by the sermon, I always felt like my dad was like, what can't you understand? Why don't you understand? Why are you questioning all this? And I think I probably frustrated him to death with all my questions. But the Bible implies that in heaven there is no giving, there is no male or female, there is no giving in marriage. The question comes down to, do you believe that we receive a glorified or a different body? And if so, why wouldn't sex be a part of heaven? But if we actually move to a different mode of being, like being made up of energy, what would that look like? I mean, remember Cocoon, Steve Guttenberg and I think it was Tawny Welch in the swimming pool, and their sex was, her alien spirit went up and his spirit went up and kind of like whirled around and, and then it was like, oh, now we need a cigarette. No, but I mean, but really, I mean, so what we call sex, I mean, how limited is it? I mean, I always used to say, if sex is 90% in the mind, in the brain, then I'm looking for a few good minds, because really good sex is good spirituality, and really good spirituality is good psychology, and and all of these things work together to create good sex. But for me, at this time in my path, I'm really kind of saving sex. Not all the time, okay, I have my masturbation. And then, and then there are times that, it's like, I feel like I just need a release or whatever, so I'm a guy. I've got that part of me. Sorry, what was I saying? I need to backtrack. What was the question? Remind me.
The question was, is there sex in heaven?
Oh, is there sex in heaven? Okay. So, so I guess I answered it. I think if we have a body, probably. If we don't, maybe it'll look like something else. So.
Okay. So how does that contrast to hell? At least the idea of it.
The idea of hell. Maybe because I feel like I've lived the hell of self on this earth, that I feel like nothing could be worse than what I've already gone through. But I conceive of hell as a state or a condition that we put ourselves in because sin, if you will, and I like the translation of sin, which is means to miss the mark. It's basically an archery term where you shoot like an arrow at a target and you miss the mark, and that's called a sin. Okay, so, but I believe that what most people might call sin, if it is sin, it has its own punishment to it, and that we're the ones who put ourselves in hell. And I think, the only part that I know about, because I haven't died yet and gone anywhere else, is that yes, my sins, or the areas where I'm not conscious in my sexuality and my relationships, where I'm not in integrity and living my life in integrity with my own values, that's the sin. That's where I miss the mark, and that impedes kind of my process towards more enlightenment. And yet I also believe that I jokingly told my father this. I said, Dad, I think you can sin your way into heaven. I do. Because if this verse is true, all things work together for good, then I can definitely sin my way into heaven. Because in the old school terms, they called it the via positiva and the via negativa. That they're both coming from a different direction, but they're coming to the same place. Whether you are a person who has had to live your world and learn all your lessons the hard way in order to be built into a character or something that more transparently reflects the divine that is inside of you, or you can try to do it by being the good boy or the good girl and doing everything well. But the truth of the matter is that Jesus wouldn't even accept the term good about himself. He says, why call me good? Do not call me good. Only my Father, God the Father in heaven, is good. So even Jesus on earth would not accept the term good. And I really don't think that God ever wanted us to be good. God wanted us to be real. I think that God values more a wrong conclusion reached with integrity and honesty than a right conclusion that is reached by just trying to stuff yourself into a little box that other people said you'd be in because you go to a certain church or you claim a certain spirituality. So.
Wow. Okay. Now, is there I don't know, is there more or less sex in heaven, earth, or hell?
Heaven, earth, or hell. And considering I'm still, I'm like, I don't even know if hell exists. So you're asking me to hypothesize. We've been given these bodies for a reason. So probably, what's the question? If we get a glorified body, do we get a de-glorified body if we go to hell? And many people joke about, I want to go to hell because that's where all my friends are going to be.
Right.
But no, I think that's really limited to the form that we inhabit, that our souls inhabit.
Sure. So that if somebody who's really sexually promiscuous, it doesn't change their chances of going to heaven or hell or being intensely spiritual or realized in a spiritual way, regardless if they change their promiscuity behavior.
Okay, well, number one, you're using a term like promiscuity. There is a term called the ethical slut. You may have heard of it. If you approach even if you're polyamorous, polyamory, people who don't understand it think, oh, wow, they just get to sleep with anybody. And of course, they're always sleeping with everybody. But, the truth of the matter is it's hard enough to juggle one person in your life, let alone two. And yet, I've been, it's really weird. I feel like in some ways I'm really blessed because I don't lust after women. When I'm attracted to a woman, it really is the whole woman. Because there are so many woundings tied up in the fear of abandonment with women and fear of, the unequal power dynamic, that for me to actually move into some kind of sexual encounter with a woman takes a lot of safety. And there's actually been studies done where, let's just say, performance anxiety lessens the more safe that the male feels within that relationship. And, I want a husband and a wife. I don't want to have to choose, It's like, why can't I have the best of both worlds? Because if God, if there is a God, and God made males and females, and the masculine and the feminine, well, then all that God is, and do not take this out of context, all that God is only perfectly manifest when there is a fuller balance of the masculine and the feminine characteristics. Now, myself as a twin who feels like I very much have a female brain, so for me, it's really just the balance. It's not what somebody has in their pants. It's not what they can do for me. It's in this time of my growth and the relationships that are teaching me how to love and teaching me how to grow. How do I use them for more self-actualization? And it's very weird because, and I think as I said in Reverend Joe's class, my concern with his theology, which he backtracked on, is I felt like bisexuals were left out of the conversation. And so that's why I took issue with him and said, I feel like you're saying if I can choose, I should be choosing women because that was God's standard, etc., etc. But I honestly believe that there are genderqueer people, there are trans people, there are women locked in men's bodies, there are, scientific cases of, somebody who has an XY, but they're raised as an XX or whatever. I don't know if those are the terms for the difference between, in the DNA. So as long as we have bodies, people are gonna be having sex, wherever it is.
Got it. How does birth control fit in to your spirituality? Is it abortions and all those things related to birth control widely accepted for you?
As I am not a woman, a real woman, as I am bodily a male, my preference would be that people would go into their sexual encounters with responsibility, and should that produce a child, that they would carry it to term, because it's a possible manifestation of God in a very unique way. And even if you have to give it up for adoption and you're not capable, for whatever reason, of raising that child, somebody will want that child. And I believe that at the very conception, the divine enters this temple of clay, this meat puppet we walk around in, So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That's kind of all the questions I had. Anything you'd like to add if you feel it wasn't fully covered or want to share? You answered each question so fully that I didn't have to ask as many questions.
Okay. And I'm probably jumped around, and I'm trusting that you can make coherence about much of it through through really good editing.
That is the goal. Leave your pencil on at that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Believe me. I remember probably working 100 hours to get an hour of footage out of that. I guess one of the things that, as I'm developing my theologies, I'm also learning about, there's something called process theology, which, if I understand the definition correctly, is a theology of becoming. And that kind of goes back to the Sidney Girard transparent self stuff. We become as we disclose ourselves to each other. And process theology, this is the definition, process theology affirms that God is working in all persons to actualize potentialities. In that sense, each religious manifestation is the divine working in a unique way to bring out the beautiful and the good. And additionally, Scripture and religion represent human interpretations of the divine. God is incarnate in the lives of all humans when they act according to a call from God. Jesus fully and every way responded to the call of God, and so the person of Jesus is theologically understood to be the divine word in human form. Whether that means he was actually God, I don't know. And I don't know if we have to know. So that's some of, gosh, I've took you through a lot of things. Let's see. I don't know.